The roar of the crowd was a dull ache in Leo Maxwell's skull, a phantom echo of the joy that had evaporated with the final buzzer. He stared at the television screen, the image of the North Carolina point guard missing the game-winning shot replaying in an endless loop. Each repetition, a fresh twist of the knife. $60,000 gone. He'd bet on Duke, a foolish, sentimental bet. His father had walked out when Leo was 8, but not before instilling a lifelong and apparently expensive allegiance to the Blue Devils. He justified it as a tax write off, a business expense even. A small one. This wasn't small. This was a crater. Leo ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, the stubble rasping against his palm. His beachfront condo, usually a sanctuary, felt like a gilded cage. The panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean mocked him with its serene indifference. He should have listened to Maria. Don't chase your losses, Leo. Her voice, even in his head, was laced with that familiar blend of exasperation and worry. He reached for the tumbler of scotch. The amber liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim, 2 fingers, then 3. It didn't help, of course. It never did. It just dulled the edges of the panic, the sickening certainty that he'd dug himself a hole too deep to climb out of. His phone buzzed on the granite countertop. An unfamiliar number. He almost ignored it. Debtors rarely called with good news. He checked it anyway. Silas, the contact name read. Just Silas, he answered, bracing himself. Maxwell. Leo, the voice on the other end, was a low rumble, smooth as aged bourbon. No accent Leo could place. Rob Knight. You could say that. The understatement felt brittle even to his own ears. I hear Duke let you down, a flat statement. Not a question. Leo's gut clenched. Silas knew. It wasn't about the money, not directly. It was about coincident knowing. This wasn't a coincidence. He'd used respectable bookies his whole life. Guys who took a percentage and kept their mouths shut. Silas was different. He'd appeared out of nowhere 3 months ago, offering ridiculously favorable odds, a level of discretion bordering on the spectral. He'd quickly become Leo's resource, and a dangerous one, Leo now suspected. How did you know? A dry chuckle. I tend to know things, Leo, especially when significant sums are involved. Listen, I'm a businessman. I see opportunities where others see setbacks. I can help you recoup your losses. And then some. Leo swirled the scotch in his glass, the ice clinking softly. What is the catch? There always was. A simple acquisition, a small item, a historical artifact, shall we say, that is going to be on display during the Morro Bay reenactment this weekend. The annual Pirate Festival. You've been before, haven't you? Take Chloe, take Chloe. The name hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't taken Chloe to the Pirate Festival in 2 years. Not since the argument. The one where he'd promised to be more present, more involved, and then broken that promise just days later with a last-minute business trip. I remember it, he said, his voice tight. Excellent. The item is a small silver astrolabe, not particularly valuable in itself, but important to a collector. Your task is simply to retrieve it and deliver it to a designated location. I'll provide details. The reward. $120,000, payable immediately upon delivery. $120,000, enough to wipe out his debt and then some. Enough to silence Maria's worries. Enough to maybe buy back some lost trust with Chloe. What am I getting myself into? Think of it as a favor for a discerning client. No risk, really, simply a matter of being in the right place at the right time. The reenactment is chaotic. Plenty of distractions. The astrolabe will be minimally secured. A simple lift, and no one else involved. Just you and me, Leo, strictly confidential. Silas's tone brooked no argument. Leo knew it was a lie, a carefully constructed falsehood designed to lull him into compliance. But he was desperate, he was drowning, and Silas was offering him a life raft. A frayed, possibly sinking life raft, but a life raft nonetheless. I'll need more details, Leo said, his voice losing some of its hesitation. Of course, I'll send you a secure message with the specifics. Consider this a business proposition. And Leo, yeah? Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to. The line went dead. Leo stared at the phone, the screen reflecting his own haggard face. He felt a prickle of unease, a cold premonition that he was making a terrible mistake. But the weight of his debts, the fear of losing everything, was heavier. The house felt colder than usual, empty even with the echoes of the television playing in the background. Chloe hadn't spoken to him properly in days, only offering clipped answers and pointed silences. He tried calling, texting, leaving voicemails, but she'd walled herself off. He found her in the kitchen, hunched over her AP Calculus homework, a tangle of dark hair obscuring her face. She was 16 now, almost a woman. Too independent, too guarded. He desperately wanted to bridge the gap between them, to recapture the easy intimacy they'd once shared, but he didn't know how. "Hey," he said, trying for a casual tone. "How is the math?" Chloe didn't look up. "Fine, big test coming up." "Yeah," still no eye contact. He leaned against the counter, trying not to invade her space. "Listen, about this weekend, I was thinking maybe we could catch a movie. There's that new sci-fi thing you wanted to see." She finally glanced up, her expression unreadable. "You're busy." The truth stung. He 40 wasn't busy. Busy chasing money, busy making mistakes. "I can make time. You always say that." Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "I mean it this time." "No, you don't. You mean it until something better comes along. A deal, a meeting, anything that takes you away from here." Her words were like shards of glass, accurate, brutal, and painfully true. He opened his mouth to protest, to offer an explanation, but the words caught in his throat. He had no defense. I just want to spend time with you, Chloe." She pushed her homework aside and finally met his gaze. Her eyes, so like her mother's, were filled with a weary disappointment that cut him to the core. "Then don't make promises you can't keep." He wanted to reach out, to take her hand, but he refrained. He didn't deserve her touch. He'd spent years prioritizing everything else over her. And now he was reaping the consequences. "Okay," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Okay, I won't." He turned and walked away, the weight of his failure pressing down on him. He was a financial disaster, a lousy father, and now, apparently, an unwitting accomplice in some shadowy scheme. He just hoped he hadn't irrevocably broken what little was left between him and his daughter. The details Silas sent were precise, chillingly so. A digital package containing schematics of the Morro Bay Museum, a layout of the reenactment area, and a photograph of the astrolabe. It was smaller than he'd imagined, a delicate silver sphere etched with intricate constellations. The security measures were minimal 30A glass case, a pressure sensor, a single, aging security guard. Child's play, Silas had assured him, but it wasn't the security that worried Leo. It was the feeling of being watched, the constant prickling sensation on the back of his neck. Even now, sitting in his condo, reviewing the plans, he felt like he was under surveillance. He spent the next 2 days meticulously planning the operation, identifying escape routes, anticipating potential complications. He told himself it was about the money, about securing his future. But deep down, he knew it was about something else, a need for control, a desperate attempt to prove to himself that he wasn't a complete failure. He drove to Morro Bay on Saturday afternoon, the coastal highway winding along the rugged cliffs. The town was already buzzing with activity. Pirates roamed the streets, their faces painted with fierce determination. Music blared from makeshift stages. The air smelled of salt water and fried food. He parked several blocks away from the museum and walked, trying to blend in with the crowd. He spotted Silas near the entrance, leaning against a weathered wooden fence, observing the scene. Silas didn't acknowledge him directly, merely gave a subtle nod. Leo spent the next hour familiarizing himself with the layout, studying the guard's routine. The man was old, easily distracted, more interested in chatting with tourists than monitoring the exhibits. The astrolabe was displayed in a dimly lit corner, almost hidden amongst other nautical artifacts. He waited for the peak of the afternoon chaos, when the reenactment was in full swing and the crowd was at its densest. He slipped into the museum, his heart pounding in his chest. He moved with a forced calm, pretending to admire the exhibits as he approached the astrolabe. The glass case was surprisingly flimsy. He used a small, specialized tool fee, another of Silas's provisions, civvy, to disable the pressure sensor with a practiced click. He lifted the case, carefully removed the astrolabe, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. It felt cold and heavy against his skin. It was over. Less than 30 seconds, he moved back into the crowd, attempting to appear nonchalant. But then, a hand gripped his arm. Looking for something, friend? He turned to face a man he hadn't noticed before. Tall, lean, with eyes as cold and gray as the ocean on a stormy day. He wore a dark suit, incongruous amongst the pirate costumes and casual attire. Just browsing, Leo said, his voice tight. The man's grip tightened. That is a very interesting pocket you have there. He didn't say what he meant, but Leo knew. He was about to make a run for it when a voice cut through the noise. Let him go, Mr. Thorne. Silas emerged from the crowd, his expression unreadable. He stood beside Leo, radiating an aura of quiet power. Silas, Thorne said, his voice dripping with menace. I didn't expect to see you here. I have many interests, Mr. Thorne. That astrolabe, for example. It is a key component, you see, not just a pretty trinket. Thorne's eyes narrowed. You know what it is, more than you might think. It is part of a collection, a very valuable collection, and I believe others are looking for it as well. Silas's gaze swept across the crowd, dangerous others. The grip on Leo's arm hadn't lessened. Thorne's hand felt like a vice, bruising already. Silas's intervention had shifted the power dynamic, but the tension hadn't dissipated. If anything, it had thickened, become viscous and suffocating. I believe we were discussing historical appreciation, Silas said smoothly, his voice carrying an undercurrent of steel. He didn't look at Leo, keeping his focus locked on Thorne. A territorial display, Leo understood, a silent warning. Thorne's eyes flickered between Silas and Leo. Calculating, just admiring the local color, he finally conceded, releasing Leo's arm. The pressure left a stinging ache. Enjoy the festival. He melted back into the crowd, disappearing as quickly as he'd appeared. Leo's heart hammered against his ribs. He risked a glance at Silas, seeking reassurance, but Silas offered only a curt nod. Get out of here, Silas murmured, his voice barely audible above the din of the reenactment. Now, I'll contact you with instructions. Leo didn't need to be told twice. He turned and pushed through the throng, adrenaline surging through his veins. The pirate festival, previously a backdrop of harmless merriment, suddenly felt menacing, a labyrinth of potential threats. He kept his hand inside his jacket, clutching the cool metal of the surveyor's keystone. It wasn't silver, as Silas had described, but a dark, mottled bronze, surprisingly heavy in his palm. The intricate carvings felt less like artistic embellishment and more like symbolism. He couldn't decipher it, but a prickle of unease traced its way up his spine. This was far more elaborate than Silas had made it sound. He reached the edge of the festival perimeter and broke into a brisk walk. Then a jog. He'd planned an escape route through an on-net network of back alleys leading to a prearranged rendezvous point 3 blocks away. But as he navigated the winding passages, he felt an unsettling sense of being watched. He glanced over his shoulder. A woman standing on the opposite side of the street, partially obscured by a vendor's stall. She wasn't dressed in a pirate costume. She wore tailored black trousers and a fitted leather jacket, her dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She wasn't actively following him, but her gaze was fixed on him, unwavering observation. Deliberate, he picked up the pace, weaving through the crowds. The woman mirrored his movements, staying just far enough back to remain inconspicuous. It wasn't a clumsy tale, it was professional. He reached the rendezvous point, a small, deserted parking lot behind a seafood restaurant. He pulled out his phone, intending to call Silas to confirm the drop-off location. No signal. He tried again. Still nothing, he cursed under his breath. Silas had assured him complete communication security. This felt like a deliberate cutoff. He glanced around, his anxiety spiking. The parking lot was empty except for a dilapidated pickup truck parked near the far end. He felt vulnerable, exposed. He needed to move as he turned to leave. He caught a glimpse of movement in the periphery. A figure standing in the shadow of a building across the square, partially hidden by a towering oak tree. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark hat that obscured his face. He couldn't make out any features, but the man's posture radiated menace. He was simply watching. Leo felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He wasn't dealing with a simple retrieval job. He was caught in something far more complex, far more dangerous. He started to run, abandoning his carefully planned escape route, relying on instinct. He sprinted through the parking lot, weaving between parked cars. Ignoring the startled glances of passers-by, he burst onto Independence Square, merging into the throngs of tourists and festival-goers. He spotted a coffee shop across the square, a potential haven, a place to blend in and regain his composure. He headed towards it, scanning the crowd, desperately searching for Silas, for any sign of help. He reached the coffee shop and slipped inside, the aroma of roasted beans momentarily calming his nerves. He ordered a black coffee, his hands trembling slightly as he fumbled with his wallet. He found a small table in the corner, overlooking the square, and slumped into a chair. His phone buzzed. A single text message from an unknown number. Finn joined the show. He stared at the message, his blood running cold. Silas wouldn't communicate like this. He looked around the coffee shop, his gaze sweeping across the faces of the other patrons. No one seemed to be paying him any attention, but he felt eyes on him burning into the back of his skull. Suddenly, a woman slid into the chair opposite him. She hadn't walked over, she'd simply thought appeared T. The same woman who'd been tailing him, the one in the black leather jacket. "Mr. Maxwell," she asked, her voice cool and authoritative. He didn't answer, simply stared at her, wary and on edge. She flashed a badge, a small metallic rectangle that didn't look like any police badge he'd ever seen. It bore a crest MPA's stylized eagle, clutching a key. Agent Monroe. "Private Investigative Services." "Private," he frowned. I thought you were with the police. We assist law enforcement on occasion, but we're independent. We work for private clients." She leaned forward, her eyes locking with his. "And my client is very interested in that Keystone you acquired." "Acquired," Leo scoffed. "I just picked it up at a festival." Monroe's lips curled into a sardonic smile. "Don't insult my intelligence, Mr. Maxwell. We've been tracking the Keystone for months. We knew someone would attempt to retrieve it during the chaos of the reenactment. We just didn't expect it to be you." "What is it?" Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What is so important about a surveyor's Keystone that is classified?" "Suffice it to say, it is a piece of a larger puzzle, a very old, very dangerous puzzle." "Dangerous? Let's just say it has the potential to rewrite history, or to unleash something unpleasant." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "My client wants it back, and he is willing to pay a substantial sum for its safe return. And if I don't return it, that is where things get complicated, Mr. Maxwell. You're already facing charges tempering grand theft, disturbing the peace, potentially even trespassing. But those are the least of your worries." Her eyes flicked towards the window. "Let's just say there are other parties interested in the Keystone. Parties who won't be as reasonable as my client." He glanced out the window, instinctively. The man in the dark hat was still there, still watching. He recognized the cold certainty in the man's posture. This wasn't random surveillance. This was a hunter stalking his prey. "Silas sent me," Leo said, desperate for a lifeline. He said it was a simple transaction. Monroe's expression hardened. "Silas. A ghost, he is a fixer, a facilitator. He rarely gets his hands dirty. He is useful, but ultimately disposable. He likely didn't tell you the full story." "What do you mean? He didn't mention the other players, did he?" "The collectors, the historians, the fanatics. The Keystone is valuable, Mr. Maxwell, and there are people who will kill for it." Leo felt a wave of despair wash over him. He was a pawn in a game he didn't understand, caught between powerful forces he couldn't comprehend. He traded his peace of mind, his relationship with his daughter, for a promise of easy money. And now he was facing imprisonment or worse. "Look," he said, his voice pleading, "I don't want any part of this. I just want to walk away." Monroe shook her head. "That is not an option. You have something someone else wants, and they're not going to let you walk away." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is not about the money anymore, Mr. Maxwell. It is about who controls the key." Suddenly, the coffee shop door burst open, and two figures in dark suits entered, their eyes scanning the room. They weren't looking for coffee, they were looking for him. Monroe's hand moved with lightning speed, reaching inside her jacket. She didn't draw a weapon, but her expression conveyed a clear message. This wasn't a negotiation, it was a siege. "We need to go," she said, her voice urgent. "Now," but before Leo could react, one of the men lunged forward, grabbing his arm. "Don't move," he barked, his grip like steel. And then Agent Monroe whispered, her voice chillingly calm. barely audible above the rising panic. "You should have known better than to trust anyone, Mr. Maxwell, especially me." The man's grip tightened, cutting off the circulation to Leo's arm. He tried to pull away, but the man was too strong. The other figure in the dark suit moved to flank him, effectively boxing him in. "Let me go," Leo protested, his voice rising in panic. "Don't make this difficult." The first man snarled, "Just hand over the Keystone." Agent Monroe intervened, moving with a grace that belied her compact frame. She delivered a sharp elbow to the first man's ribs, momentarily stunning him. "Get him out of here," she barked at Leo. "Now." He didn't need to be told twice. He wrenched his arm free and bolted for the coffee shop door, knocking over chairs and scattering tables in his wake. The two men were in hot pursuit, their faces contorted with rage. He burst onto the street, dodging pedestrians and weaving through traffic. He risked a glance over his shoulder. Monroe was holding her own, expertly disarming the two men. But they were relentless. She was good, but outnumbered. He had to lose them. He ducked into a narrow alleyway, scrambling over a pile of overflowing garbage cans. The stench was overpowering, but it offered a momentary shield. He heard the men crashing through the alley entrance, their heavy footsteps echoing off the brick walls. He sprinted deeper into the labyrinthine network of alleys, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming in protest. He stumbled, nearly falling, but managed to regain his balance. He realized he was hopelessly lost, disoriented in the maze of narrow passageways. He finally emerged onto a quieter street, several blocks from the coffee shop. He leaned against a brick wall, gasping for air, his body trembling with exhaustion. He looked back, but the men were nowhere to be seen. He'd lost them for now. He found a secluded bench in a small park and collapsed onto it, trying to gather his thoughts. Monroe, the Keystone, the secret society. He felt like he'd stumbled into a conspiracy thriller, a world of shadows and deception. He needed answers, it is rumored. Monroe had said, her voice low and conspiratorial, that the Keystone unlocks a hidden chamber built by Benjamin Franklin himself. The chamber, according to legend, was a repository of knowledge, a vault containing secrets vital to the founding of the nation. A brilliant scientist and inventor was also a known Freemason, and the chamber was said to be modeled after the secret lodges of the era. A flicker of memory surfaced, a half-forgotten lecture from a history class in college. The Revolutionary War wasn't just fought on battlefields, it was a war of ideas, of information. And a clandestine network of patriots, known as the Keepers of the Flame, had been formed to protect those ideas, to ensure they wouldn't be lost or corrupted. He remembered the professor mentioning a hidden cipher, a complex code used by the Keepers to conceal their most sensitive information. The cipher, he recalled, was based on astronomical symbols and alchemical formulas. Could the Keystone be the key to deciphering that code? He pulled out his phone, ignoring the fact that it still had no signal. He opened his internet browser, hoping to find some information about the Keystone. He typed in a string of keywords: Surveyor's Keystone, Benjamin Franklin, Keepers of the Flame. The search results were surprisingly sparse. Most of the websites were conspiracy theory forums, filled with outlandish claims and unsubstantiated rumors. But one article, published by a small historical society, caught his eye. It detailed the history of colonial-era surveying tools and mentioned a series of unusually ornate keystones commissioned by Franklin for use in surveying the newly formed nation. The article included an image of one of those keystones. It wasn't identical to the one he possessed, but the similarities were striking. Both were made of bronze, and both were engraved with intricate symbols. He scrolled down to the end of the article and found a footnote referencing a collection of unpublished manuscripts held by the Library of Congress. He made a mental note to investigate further. He spent the next several hours scouring the internet, piecing together fragments of information. He discovered that the Keystone's engravings weren't random decorations. They were a complex cipher, a series of astronomical symbols and alchemical formulas that corresponded to specific letters and numbers. He began to meticulously transcribe the symbols onto a notepad, cross-referencing them with online resources and historical texts. It was painstaking work, but he was driven by a desperate need to understand what he was holding, what he was caught up in. He felt a sense of mounting dread as he began to realize the depth of the conspiracy. This wasn't about money or power or even historical preservation. This was about something far more fundamental. something that threatened the very foundations of his understanding of the world. As dusk settled over the city, he finally cracked a portion of the cipher. A series of constellations corresponded to coordinates, longitude and latitude. He plugged the coordinates into a mapping app. The location, Independence Hall, Philadelphia. Specifically, a point directly beneath the building. He stared at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. A hidden chamber beneath Independence Hall. It sounded like something out of a Dan Brown novel. He was so engrossed in his work. He didn't hear the footsteps approaching. A shadow fell across his notepad. He looked up and saw two figures looming over him. Not the men from the coffee shop. These were different. Younger, more disciplined, their faces devoid of emotion. "Looking for something, Mr. Maxwell?" One of them asked, his voice cold and menacing. Before Leo could respond, the man lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar. The second man moved to secure his hands. He struggled, but they were too strong. He was outnumbered, outmatched. He managed to kick at one of the attackers, sending him stumbling backwards, giving himself a precious few seconds to break free. He scrambled to his feet and ran, sprinting across the park, dodging trees and startled pedestrians. He glanced back. His attackers were in pursuit, moving with relentless determination. They weren't trying to arrest him. They were trying to eliminate him. He was being hunted, and he was running out of time. He finally made it back to his condo, his lungs burning, his body aching. He locked the door, bolted the windows, and barricaded himself inside. He knew it wouldn't hold them for long, but it would buy him some time. He sank onto the sofa, his mind racing. He had to call Chloe. He had to warn her. He reached for his phone, intending to dial her number, but then he paused. He hesitated. What if they were tracking his phone? What if they used Chloe to get to him? He couldn't risk it. He couldn't put her in danger. He closed his eyes, battling a wave of guilt and regret. He'd failed her before. He wouldn't fail her again. He pulled out his laptop and began to compose an email, a carefully worded message that avoided any mention of the Keystone or the danger he was in. He simply told her he was working on a sensitive project and wouldn't be able to see her for a while. He apologized for his absence, promising to make it up to her as soon as he could. He finished the email, hesitated again. Then hit send. He knew it wasn't enough. He wanted to tell her everything, to confide in her, but he couldn't. He had to protect her, even if it meant sacrificing his own happiness. He turned his attention back to the Keystone, determined to unravel its secrets. He had to understand what he was dealing with, what he was caught up in. He had to find a way to survive. He focused on the portion of the cipher he'd already decoded, the coordinates pointing to a specific location beneath Independence Hall. He revisited the historical articles, searching for any clues, any references to a hidden chamber. He found a small, obscure footnote in an academic paper referencing a series of secret passages built by Franklin during the construction of Independence Hall. The passages were said to have been used by the Keepers of the Flame for clandestine meetings and the safekeeping of sensitive documents. The paper mentioned a hidden access point, a concealed doorway located within the building's foundation. The doorway was said to be disguised as a section of the original brickwork, accessible only by manipulating a specific sequence of bricks. He stared at the Keystone, his fingers tracing the intricate carvings. Could the Keystone be the key to unlocking that doorway? Could it provide the precise sequence needed to access the hidden chamber? He continued to work, meticulously deciphering the code. His brow furrowed in concentration. He felt a surge of adrenaline as he began to piece together more of the puzzle. He discovered a series of numbers embedded within the astronomical symbols, numbers that corresponded to specific bricks within the foundation. He had it. He had a sequence, a precise set of instructions. He grabbed a pen and paper and began to sketch out a diagram, mapping the brick sequence onto a floor plan of Independence Hall. He worked feverishly, fueled by desperation and a desperate hope that he was on the verge of a breakthrough. And then, as he completed the diagram, he noticed something, a small, almost imperceptible symbol embedded within the sequence. A symbol that hadn't been mentioned in any of the historical texts. A symbol that looked eerily familiar. It was the crest of the society. The eagle clutching a key, the same crest he'd seen on Agent Monroe's badge. The wrought iron gates of Independence National Historical Park loomed like skeletal fingers against the inky sky. Leo slipped through a gap in the fence, his heart hammering against his ribs. He'd spent the last 2 hours studying blueprints, memorizing guard patrol routes, and formulating a plan. Infiltration wasn't his forte, but desperation had a way of sharpening focus. He moved like a shadow hugging the perimeter wall, avoiding the pools of light cast by the security lamps. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the distant hum of city traffic and the rustling of leaves in the ancient trees. He reached the rear of Independence Hall, the massive brick structure looming before him, like a fortress. He located the section of foundation identified in his research, a stretch of weathered brickwork obscured by overgrown ivy. He pulled out the keystone, his fingers trembling slightly. He traced the sequence of bricks, identifying the specific points indicated by the cipher. He pressed the keystone against the wall, aligning the carvings with the corresponding bricks. A faint grinding sound echoed from within the wall. He applied pressure, nothing. He adjusted the angle. Aligned the carvings and pressed again. This time, a section of the brickwork slid inward, revealing a narrow opening, a dark and forbidding passage. Impressive, a voice said from behind him. Leo whirled around, instinctively raising his hands in defense. Agent Monroe stood a few feet away, her face illuminated by the moonlight. She held a small, silenced pistol. "I knew you couldn't resist," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You're a remarkably predictable man, Mr. Maxwell." "I should have known you'd be here," Leo snarled, his adrenaline surging. "I'm simply retrieving what belongs to my client," Monroe said. "Hand over the keystone and no one gets hurt. And if I don't, let's just say your little game ends here." She raised the pistol, her aim unwavering. Leo knew he couldn't reason with her. He was outgunned, outmatched. He had to act fast. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the first shot, and scrambled into the opening, disappearing into the darkness. Monroe cursed under her breath and followed him inside, her flashlight beam slicing through the gloom. The passage was narrow and claustrophobic, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and mildew. He sprinted down the passage, his hands outstretched, feeling his way along the rough-hewn stone walls. The passage twisted and turned, branching off in multiple directions. He consulted the diagram he'd sketched earlier, trying to navigate the maze. "Don't bother running, Mr. Maxwell," Monroe's voice echoed behind him. "There is nowhere to go." He ignored her, his focus laser-sharp. He reached a junction and took a sharp left. Following a narrow corridor that sloped downwards, he could hear Monroe gaining on him, her footsteps echoing closer with each passing second. Suddenly, shadows detached themselves from the darkness ahead. Two figures blocked his path, their faces obscured by the gloom. They were built like brick houses, their arms crossed, their expressions menacing. Silas's enforcers. "Looks like we have a guest," one of them said, his voice gravelly. "And an unwelcome one," the other added, cracking his knuckles. Before Leo could react, Monroe appeared behind him, blocking his escape. He was surrounded. "It is over, Mr. Maxwell," Monroe said, her voice cold and clinical. "Give us the keystone, and we'll make this quick." He clenched his fist, his knuckles white. He wasn't going down without a fight. He launched himself at Monroe, knocking her off balance. He wrestled with her, struggling to disarm her. The enforcers moved in, attempting to subdue him. A brutal melee ensued, a chaotic flurry of fists and elbows. Leo fought with a ferocity born of desperation, but he was outnumbered and outmatched. He managed to land a few decent blows, momentarily stunning one of the enforcers. But they quickly recovered. He felt a sharp pain in his ribs, a searing agony that stole his breath. He used his knowledge of the building to his advantage, ducking beneath the enforcer's arms, weaving through the narrow corridors. He remembered a mention of a ventilation shaft in the historical records, a hidden passage that ran along the foundation. He spotted the shaft, a small opening concealed behind a loose brick. He shoved the brick aside and squeezed inside, crawling on his hands and knees through the cramped space. The ventilation shaft was dark, dusty, and claustrophobic. He could hear the enforcers and Monroe searching for him, their voices echoing through the passages. He crawled for what felt like an eternity, his muscles burning, his lungs screaming for air. He emerged from the shaft into a small hidden chamber, a secret room he hadn't known existed. He stood up, brushing the dust off his clothes. The chamber was circular with thick stone walls and a vaulted ceiling. It was empty except for a single wooden table in the center of the room. And on the table, neatly stacked, were dozens of leather-bound volumes. He approached the table, his heart pounding with anticipation. He opened the first volume, carefully turning the brittle pages. He discovered they weren't filled with gold or jewels, as he'd half expected. They were filled with text, encrypted text. The documents were a vast collection of colonial-era correspondence, journals, and reports, meticulously encoded using the same cipher he'd deciphered on the Keystone. He was standing in a treasure trove of historical secrets. Suddenly, the chamber door burst open and a figure stepped inside. It wasn't Monroe. It was a man he'd only heard mentioned in hushed whispers, a ruthless collector known only as Kane Tall, imposing with a face that radiated cold authority. He was the one who truly wanted the Keystone. So Kane said, his voice a low growl, "We finally meet, Mr. Maxwell." He motioned, and two more of his enforcers appeared behind him, their weapons drawn. But something was off. Where was Agent Monroe? She had been hot on his trail just moments ago, but now she was gone, vanished without a trace. Leo glanced around, searching for an escape route, but there was none. He was trapped. Kane smiled, a chillingly predatory expression. "Looks like you're all out of options." He paused, his eyes gleaming with sinister intent. "Now where is the Keystone?" The smile didn't reach Kane's eyes. It was a predator's rictus, promising pain. Leo knew he couldn't win in a straight fight. Not against Kane and his enforcers. He needed to exploit their overconfidence. He feigned surrender, raising his hands in the air. "All right, you got me," he said, his voice deliberately meek. "Just take the Keystone and leave me alone." Kane chuckled, lowering his guard for a fraction of a second. That was all Leo needed. He lunged forward, aiming a desperate punch at Kane's jaw. It wasn't a textbook strike, more of a clumsy haymaker, but it connected, rocking Kane back on his heels. Before Kane could recover, Leo grabbed a heavy brass candlestick from the table and swung it with all his might, connecting with the side of Kane's head. Kane stumbled, falling to the floor with a groan. The enforcers reacted instantly, moving to intercept Leo. He ducked under their reach and sprinted for the chamber door, shoving one of them into the other as he went. He burst out of the chamber and into the maze of passages, dodging and weaving, relying on the layout he'd memorized. He could hear Kane's enraged shouts echoing behind him, followed by the heavy footsteps of his enforcers. He ran blindly, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming in protest. He reached the ventilation shaft and squeezed inside, crawling through the narrow space. Ignoring the dust and grime, he emerged into the night air, gasping for breath, and sprinted across the grounds of Independence Hall. He scaled the perimeter fence, ignoring the sharp barbs digging into his skin, and disappeared into the darkness. He found refuge in a dingy motel on the outskirts of Philadelphia, securing a room under a false name. He collapsed onto the bed, exhausted and battered, the stack of encrypted documents safely tucked inside a duffel bag. He needed information, he needed answers. He managed to find a local librarian willing to let him use a computer after hours. He typed in Agent Monroe's name, hoping to find some record of her affiliation. The results were sparse. She was a ghost, her identity obscured by layers of aliases and shell corporations. But he did find one intriguing detail. A series of recent investigations linked to illegal antiquities trafficking, all centered around a single individual, Silas. Silas wasn't just a bookie. He was a fence, a purveyor of stolen artifacts, a shadow operative operating in the underworld of historical treasures. And Agent Monroe had been tracking him for months. The realization hit Leo like a punch to the gut. He'd been played. He'd been a pawn in a much larger game. He spent the rest of the night painstakingly deciphering the documents, using his limited knowledge of the cipher and online resources. Slowly, painstakingly, the secrets began to unravel. The documents revealed a shocking truth. The Founding Fathers, fearing the potential for tyranny, had established a secret contingency plan, a safeguard against the possibility that the newly formed government would betray its ideals. They had foreseen the dangers of unchecked power, the potential for corruption and abuse. They had compiled a vast collection of information, Hunnite evidence of wrongdoing, hidden accounts, and a detailed blueprint for dismantling a corrupt regime soon, and concealed it within Independence Hall, protected by a complex system of codes and ciphers. The Keystone wasn't just a key to a hidden chamber. It was a key to a hidden history. Silas wasn't interested in the Keystone itself. He was after the documents, the secrets they contained. He wanted to control the narrative, to rewrite history, to exploit the Founding Fathers' contingency plan for his own nefarious purposes. He understood now the scale of the danger. He wasn't just facing a ruthless collector or a shadowy government agent. He was facing a threat to the very foundations of American democracy. His phone buzzed. He jumped, startled. It couldn't be Monroe. She wouldn't risk exposure. He hesitantly unlocked the screen. It was an unknown number, he answered. Maxwell, he said cautiously. Hello, Leo, the voice said. It was Silas. What do you want? Leo asked, his voice tight with apprehension. I've been following your progress, Silas said, his tone smooth and menacing. You've managed to unlock the chamber, impressive, but you're playing with forces you don't understand. I know what you're after, Leo retorted. You want the documents. The documents represent a unique opportunity, Leo, a chance to reshape the future. You possess something of great value. Return it to me, and I assure you, no harm will come to you. You used me, Silas. You lied to me. I merely presented you with an opportunity. You made your own choices. Silas paused. But I believe we have a shared history, Leo, a connection you're not aware of. What are you talking about? Your grandfather, Arthur Maxwell. He was a keeper of the flame, a devoted member of the society that protected those documents. He dedicated his life to ensuring their safety. Leo's breath caught in his throat. His grandfather, he'd always known his grandfather was a history professor. A quiet, unassuming man, but he'd never known he was part of a secret society, a guardian of a hidden legacy. You're lying. Am I? Look into it, Leo. You'll find the truth. Your family's history is inextricably linked to these documents. And now, I believe, it is your destiny to fulfill your grandfather's legacy. My destiny? You want me to help you. I want you to understand the importance of what is at stake. The documents must be protected from those who would exploit them and from those who would destroy them. And you think, Twen, you're protecting them, Silas chuckled. That, Leo, remains to be seen. The line went dead. Leo stared at the phone, his mind reeling. His grandfather, a secret society, a hidden legacy. He felt a surge of conflicting emotions, disbelief, confusion, and a growing sense of dread. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text message. From Chloe Thun, I saw you on the news, Independence Hall. Are you okay? He'd been identified. His face was plastered all over the local news channels. He'd put Chloe in danger. He hesitated. Unsure whether to respond, he didn't want to involve her, to expose her to the chaos. But he couldn't ignore her plea. He typed a reply. Time fine, Chloe. It is complicated. Just stay put. Don't talk to anyone. He sent the message knowing it wasn't enough. She was a smart, resourceful girl. She wouldn't just sit idly by. A few minutes later, his motel room door swung open, and Chloe stood in the doorway, her face pale with worry. What is going on, Dad? She asked, her voice trembling. I saw the reports. They're saying you stole something from Independence Hall. Is it true? Leo sighed. He knew he couldn't lie to her, not anymore. It is a long story, Chloe, he said, bracing himself for the inevitable confrontation. And it is a dangerous one. He looked into his daughter's eyes, a desperate plea for understanding. And it involves your grandfather. Grandfather wasn't just a historian, was he? Chloe asked, her voice barely a whisper. She'd followed Leo inside the motel room, shutting the door behind her with a decisive click. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the duffel bag, the scattered documents, the palpable tension. He was a keeper, Leo said, sinking onto the edge of the bed. A guardian of a secret society tasked with protecting these documents. Protecting them from what? From those who would abuse the power they contain, from those who would rewrite history for their own gain. He explained about the Founding Fathers' contingency plan, the fear of tyranny, the complex web of codes and ciphers. Chloe listened intently, absorbing the information, her initial fear giving way to a grudging respect. So Silas, he wants to use this plan for something bad. He believes he can fix the world, Chloe. His vision of fixing it involves controlling information, manipulating events, and silencing dissent. My grandfather dedicated his life to preventing someone like Silas from gaining access to these documents. And you just got caught up in it because you owed someone money. Leo winced. It is more complicated than that. I was chasing a loss, chasing a feeling. I made a mistake. A terrible one, and I dragged you into it. You always do, Chloe said, her voice laced with sadness. You always prioritize everything over us. He couldn't argue with that. It was the truth. I know. And I'm sorry I messed up, Chloe, but I'm going to fix this. I'm going to protect these documents, and I'm going to make sure Silas doesn't get his hands on them. His phone buzzed again. Another text from Silas. Sim meet me, City Hall Tower parking garage midnight. Come alone, bring the documents, or your daughter suffers the consequences. Leo's blood ran cold. Silas was playing dirty. He was willing to use Chloe as leverage. He is threatening you, Chloe said, her eyes widening in fear. I'm going, Leo said, his voice resolute. But you're staying here. I'll handle this. No, Chloe protested. I'm coming with you. I want to help. He tried to dissuade her, but she was adamant. She was his daughter, after all. Determined and resourceful, he knew he couldn't stop her. The City Hall Tower parking garage was a concrete labyrinth, dimly lit and eerily silent. Leo parked several levels below ground and approached the rendezvous point cautiously, Chloe following close behind. He found Silas standing near a pair of black SUVs surrounded by his heavily armed enforcers. Silas was impeccably dressed as always, his expression unreadable. You came, Silas said. His voice smooth and expectant. Good, and you brought the documents. Leo held up the duffel bag. I have them, but not for you. Don't be foolish, Leo. You're outmatched. Surrender the documents, and I guarantee your daughter's safety. You made a mistake threatening her, Leo said, his voice firm. You underestimate the lengths a father will go to protect his child. Sentimentality is a weakness, Leo, something your grandfather should have taught you. My grandfather understood the value of freedom. Silas, something you clearly don't. Silas's expression hardened. You're a disappointment, Leo. Your family has guarded these documents for generations, and you're going to squander their legacy. My grandfather believed in protecting these documents, not exploiting them. He believed in the ideals they represent. Ideals are for fools, Silas sneered. Power is the only thing that matters, he gestured to his enforcers. Take the documents. The enforcers moved forward, but Leo was ready for them. He'd spent the last few hours studying the blueprints of the parking garage, identifying potential escape routes and choke points. He knew the layout better than Silas's men. He used the concrete pillars and parked cars as cover, leading his pursuers on a chaotic chase through the maze-like parking garage. He utilized his knowledge of Philadelphia's history, remembering a network of service tunnels beneath the city that connected to the parking garage. He and Chloe slipped into one of the tunnels, disappearing into the darkness, while Silas and his men scrambled to find them. Where are we going? Chloe asked, her voice echoing in the tunnel. To a place where we can make a phone call, Leo said. Agent Monroe was waiting for him, at a prearranged location, a small diner a few blocks from the parking garage. She arrived with a squad of federal agents, who immediately swarmed the diner, securing the perimeter. I was beginning to think you weren't going to show, Monroe said, her expression unreadable. Silas threatened my daughter, Leo explained. I had to be sure you were legitimate. I understand, Monroe said. We've been tracking Silas for years. He is a master manipulator, an expert at exploiting historical artifacts for personal gain. She nodded to her agents. We have a warrant for Silas and his associates. We're going to bring them in. Within hours, Silas and his enforcers were in custody, facing a litany of charges ranging from illegal antiquities trafficking to kidnapping and conspiracy. Monroe recovered the stolen artifacts, ensuring their safe return to their rightful owners. She turned to Leo, a flicker of respect in her eyes. You did good, Mr. Maxwell, she said. You may have stumbled into this by accident, but you ultimately did the right thing. Back at the motel, Leo and Chloe sat in silence, exhaustion weighing heavily on them. He'd called a Gamblers Anonymous hotline and scheduled his first meeting. He knew it would be a long and difficult road, but he was determined to overcome his addiction, to be the father Chloe deserved. I'm sorry, Dad, Chloe said, breaking the silence. I was so hard on you. I deserve it, Leo said. I haven't been the best father, but I'm going to try. I promise. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tight. It was the first truly honest embrace they'd shared in years. There is one more thing, he said, releasing her. He retrieved the stack of documents and began to flip through them, searching for a specific passage. He'd noticed something earlier, a subtle anomaly that had piqued his curiosity. He found it, a hidden codicil tucked away at the end of the collection. A single sheet of parchment written in a faded hand. It wasn't part of the original contingency plan. It was a separate message addressed to the next keeper. He read the message aloud, his voice trembling with astonishment. Should these documents ever fall into the wrong hands, or should the original contingency plan prove insufficient, seek out the Keystone's companion. It lies hidden beneath the watchful gaze of the Founding Father, where the river meets the sky. Only then will you understand the full extent of the Keeper's legacy. He looked at Chloe, his eyes wide with wonder. "There is more, Chloe," he said. "There is another secret waiting to be uncovered." The hunt, it seemed, was far from over.